If we can eliminate billions and billions of dollars of dead weight or sand in the gears here, that's going to be a huge contribution to the health systems of our country. By lowering expenses of doctors, expediting their administrative tasks, freeing them up to spend more time with patients or whatever they want to do to enhance the healthcare system, us taking away this wasted motion and giving it back to the doctors, we think is a huge contribution.
That's the voice of Jim Dougherty, co-founder and executive chairman of Madaket Health, a cloud-based platform that streamlines administrative data exchange between healthcare payers and providers. Our conversation with Jim was so interesting, it will be the focus of the next 2 episodes. In part 1, Jim shares his journey from fintech to healthcare IT and what he's doing next to raise capital to further Madaket's reach. He also explains Madaket's mission to simplify time and money-wasting transactions for healthcare providers, allowing doctors to remain focused on what's most important, improving the quality and care for a better patient experience. You're listening to How I Transform This, presented by Versus 12. Versus 12 is the award-winning Salesforce Gold consulting partner focused on healthcare innovation nationwide. I'm your host, Clark Buckner, and along with Versus 12 founder and CEO, Tammy Hawes, each episode, we're seeking out healthcare technology industry leaders, exploring stories of success through the transformation of healthcare. For more stories like this, head on over to versus12.com/podcast. Let's jump in.
Hi, my name is Jim Dougherty, and I've been in healthcare tech for 7 years.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us on How I Transform This.
Yes, thank you, Jim. From the first time we had a conversation, I knew you had to be on our podcast. You've had such a great career, not just in tech, but as an entrepreneur, and I'm really excited to share your story with our listeners.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And what's really special, I think, is we've been quarantine lockdown for a while, and I am actually looking across the table and I can see Tammy. We are back together and we are at her office. We're usually in our studio downtown Nashville, but Tammy's got these awesome, we're in this big boardroom. It's a pretty day out, the sun's out. Inside here, we've got our sound panels up. So we are not only ready to buckle down for this interview, but I think, Jim, we're going to actually make this into a double header. 2
Great.
interviews with you back to back for our listeners because you have such good insights that we're excited to be jumping into in just a moment. So, Jim, take us back to the past, your story, and how did you find yourself as a CEO of a healthcare tech company? Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a serial entrepreneur of tech companies, mostly in fintech, but not exclusively. Some of them are general tech, like a company called MetaMatrix, which was a Kleiner Perkins company. But 20 years ago, right now, I was CEO and chairman of a company called Intralinks. And Intralinks was a game changer. It actually redid the way Wall Street firms conduct large financial transactions. Back in 2000, we created a SaaS platform that was cloud and subscription agreement, which was way ahead of its time. The only other company that we knew it doing at the time was Salesforce.com. And we were very successful. We ended up basically getting roughly an 80% market share between all these humongous Wall Street firms, and we sold directly to the CIOs of Wall Street firms, which are the toughest and most difficult clients to sell to. And we basically became this organizing principle sitting between all these large institutions and all the people they have to deal with in order to transact large financial transactions. And so when we started doing this, they were basically, if you needed to communicate with lawyers and investors and accountants and financial analysts, you had to send them overnight packages. You had to send them PDFs. And you had to do it bilaterally. So each bank had to send it to the 20 lawyers or the 20 investors or the 20 accountants. And then the 20 accountants would then mark up the document and send it back to the bank. And they would be getting deluged with all these documents. And so we basically got in the middle of all that and became the place where people would post these documents and then allow access to the people who needed to see it. It was way ahead of its time. It took what used to take 20 weeks and brought it down to like 9 or 10. It became the organizing principle, making everything much more efficient and cost effective. And so we eventually sold the company to a private equity firm, and it's still alive. It has been bouncing around the PE world several times, 3 or 4 different sales, but it was transformational. And what happened was that the team that developed that platform was up here in Boston, 4 MIT guys. And what we did was, over the years after that success, we stayed in touch. And then about 7 to 8 years ago, we got back together again and said, hey, let's do one more thing together. We had a good time last time and it was successful. Everybody did well financially and reputationally. Let's try it again. And we said healthcare seems to be going through the same types of trials and tribulations that financial services was going through back in the late 90s, early 2000s. New regulations, deregulations, new technology being introduced. So it seemed to be ripe for disruption and ripe for something that we could do. What we knew we were is world-class enterprise software creators. And we knew that, generally speaking, people would agree that healthcare software is, 15 or 20 years behind leading edge. But the deficit we faced was that we had never done healthcare before, and we didn't know anything. But again, we were great at software, and we knew that there must be a place in healthcare where we can apply our software skills. So the first thing we did is we did 60 interviews in healthcare. There were 5 of us at the time.
Interviews, sort of like informational, like just trying to learn more about these problems in healthcare that you might not know about?
Yeah, it would be sort of akin to primary market research, right? So tell us about the things that you do today. What are the problems? What are the bottlenecks? What are the inefficiencies? What are your biggest problems? What would be your number 1, number 2, and number 3 things that you could solve with software or process improvements? And, we talked to insurance companies, we talked to vendors, we talked to doctors, we talked to hospital administrators. And this recurring theme kept cropping up that there was this huge amount of dead weight placed on the system between payers and providers exchanging administrative information. The same issue that we found in financial services, because it was never done in a coordinated way. It was never centralized. There were no standards, and it was extremely wasteful. So we gathered up the learnings from these 60 interviews. And
How long did that take to do all those?
About 9 months. So we gathered up the information and went to 2 forward-thinking venture capitalists, one in New York, one in Boston, and we sort of presented them what we found and our team, and they liked the team because obviously we had succeeded previously at scale, which is always a boost for a VC, and they liked the information we found. They said, so they gave us a couple $100,000 of seed money and said, go and get some more information, come back and talk to us. So we did. We did another 60 interviews, so 120 altogether. And I've been teaching entrepreneurship at MIT for 11 years now, and I will tell you that the number 1 deficit for entrepreneurs is doing enough primary market research before they jump in and start building something. Entrepreneurs always rely on gut instincts or something they saw or someone's, an anecdote. And when they jump in and then they find out that there isn't as many people as they thought in that market or it had been addressed by other vendors. So 120 might be overkill, but we felt it was appropriate. And basically it became clear that we found that between $23 and $24 billion of cost was expended to communicate between health systems and providers and insurance companies. There was no organizing principle whatsoever. It was the same things over and over again. And we identified 5 major exchanges: EDI enrollment, credentialing, contracting, privileging, and directory services. There were more, but those are the 5 big ones. And between them, there was $23 or $24 billion worth of waste. And when we talked to the heads of these big health systems and asked them about this, they said, yeah, I do all those 5. And right now I do them either with homegrown software or with a point solution or done totally manually. And I hate that. It's the bane of my existence because there's no leverage, there's no synergies. And if I could deliver that information to the payers from one platform, one user interface, one data store, that would be revolutionary for me. So that's basically what we're building. We're trying to build a platform like we did at Intralinks that sits between all these players who are exchanging information on a regular basis, now doing it bilaterally, one at a time. So every health system communicates one at a time with each insurance company, and each insurance company communicates one at a time with each health system. Thoroughly inefficient. We decided to try to replicate our success at Intralinks and become that platform that sits in the center and becomes the organizing principle between these entities. Not one person we've talked to in the health systems that we talked to has said this is a crazy idea. They say this is exactly what we would like to do, and we wish you success. So that's what we're doing right now. We chose EDI enrollment first because it was counterintuitively, because it was the smallest of the 5. And we chose it for 2 reasons. One is we would expect to find very little or no competition because it's so small, and that turned out to be true. But also that it was, because of its size, it was something we as new to healthcare could bite off, chew, and swallow. The other ones were much larger applications, and would be tougher for us to do as a first step. But we also knew that EDI enrollment was an essential thing that all providers have to do, or all provider groups. You don't get paid if you're not enrolled. And so this was not a nice to have. This was an absolute must. So we knew that it would be useful and that it would be helpful. And our initial use case was a typical doctor does business with 25 insurance companies. We know that. And what we got a research report from a large payer said that when a doctor makes his or her change to their profile, it takes on average for them to notify all 25 insurance companies, because they'll get one or two done and then they get back to being a doctor and then they forget and then they get a bill paid to the wrong tax ID or to the wrong address and they go back and do some more. But by the time they did all 25, it was 4 months. So our original use case was, if I'm a doctor and I make a change to my user profile, I go into Madaket, I make the change, and then hit enter, and then up pops the 25 insurance companies you do business with. Do you want to notify them of this new information? And you say, yes, of course I do. So you hit enter, and then you walk away. So our software marries the new data to the forms and then disseminates it to the payer in the format they want. Every payer, payers want it in different formats, so we do that. So we take care of all of that for the provider. And this was very exciting to people we showed it to. It was very exciting to investors. And because what used to take 4 months now literally takes under 4 minutes. We thought about saying 4 seconds, but it just didn't seem credible. But we wanted to keep the 4 in there. So it takes about 4 minutes. So that benefits everybody. So the payers get a more consolidated delivery of data. The providers get paid faster. The intermediaries get paid faster. So, everybody wins when we do this successfully. So we did our EDI enrollment to start. And our second one, which we went live with last fall, is a payer enrollment, which is a portion of credentialing. That's where we are now. We use that initial use case to raise our Series A. And then we had a huge amount of traction from that. We now have 65% of all provider groups enrolled on our platform, EDI enrolled on our platform. And so we use that to raise a Series B. And that's pretty much where we are right now.
That's a really good deep dive on everywhere you've been. Super comprehensive on where you've been and where you've gotten to today. So Tammy, I know you've got a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's so fabulous that you brought the band back together, so to speak.
Right.
Because I do believe that, number one, healthcare is ripe for other industries to come in and influence what they're doing. And I believe that smart people can really change healthcare. And that's a big part of what we're doing at Versus 12. And it's a reason why we have this podcast, too, to highlight those stories we hear. And to a certain extent, we're kind of like brother and sister companies. We both have an investment from Salesforce Ventures. So that's fantastic. Obviously, we're bought into Salesforce. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Salesforce has been a great partner. It turns out that 20 years ago when I was at Intralinks, Mark Benioff came and met me in New York and asked me to become a client of Salesforce. I agreed to it, and so back in February 2000, when Salesforce was, I think, started in July 99, so it was only 8 months old, we became a very early customer of Salesforce. His team told me we were customer number 7. I have no way of verifying that, but that's what his team told me at the time. And then we've been in touch and a supporter of Salesforce ever since, and love how they approach the world and love how they think about things. They've obviously been massively successful, and we hope to replicate that. And then when we did our Series B, they were intrigued enough with what we were doing, because they were trying to go into healthcare big time. It was a big focus of theirs as a market they wanted to try to dominate. They were intrigued by what we were doing, and so they invested in us. And then subsequent to that, we ended up not only getting that investment, but we ended up signing an agreement with them to be an ISV partner, whereby they will introduce us into their client base and their prospect base, whereby we can co-sell our solutions. Because our payer enrollment and EDI enrollment are very, as I mentioned to you before, these are not nice to haves. You have to be enrolled and you have to be credentialed. And so once people change the way they do things to accommodate automation, it's going to be they're going to be loath to go back. Because why would you want to go back to the old way of doing things with throwing people at it, paper at it, old software at it? And so we are in the process of working with them to help them deliver better software to their client base. So it's been great. They're a wonderful company. I've always impressed with, every time I go to their headquarters and see the sort of unified sense of enthusiasm for what they're doing. And we went to the new one, but then also older ones. And I give tip my hat to Mark and his team for everybody sings from the same hymnal, everybody's enthusiastic, everybody speaks the same with one voice, and it's I hope I can replicate that someday as a CEO. So my hat's off to Mark. Anyway, so our relationship is that they invested in us in our Series B, and that we're working towards helping them deliver our solutions to their customers to help them solidify their position in the healthcare marketplace.
So, Jim, we've talked about this before because we have a product as well on the Salesforce App Exchange that solves some of these things around provider enrollment, credentialing, onboarding, contracting, fee schedules, pricing methodologies. But what you have is all the documentation that goes with it and some other things around credentialing that we don't have. So I think that the good thing that Salesforce does is they bring these pieces together through partners. So we're in the same boat with you there. Well, I would like to know, though, just based on this sub-segment of the market around this use case, how often do you run into CAQH, and what do you think about that? Because they've kind of dominated the market as it relates to data. I'm not so sure about the documentation side. Have you run into them at all?
On the periphery, they obviously are a big player. I think the market would support having more choices in terms of how to store their data and get it to payers. And so we potentially could be another source for that. And but they have not been an impediment to our movements to date. And we've had several conversations with them. I think we are on good terms. And I think we can both, be successful in the marketplace at the same time. It isn't a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I agree. I believe what you have is very complementary.
Yeah. So, Jim, you gave us a really great deep dive into your company. And now at the beginning, you were telling us, you got all this research, you take that, you go build something, you get more feedback with growing it and scaling it. And eventually you raise a Series A, you raise a Series B. And is that where you're at right now today? Like, kind of catch us up to right where we're at right now, and then where the company is going and why that matters to you in this industry of trying to remove all that dead weight you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so where we are now, we just recently, last fall, launched our payer enrollment credentialing app, and we're in the middle of extending our Series B. We're raising another round to extend it, and the purpose of that round will be to help us further build out our Salesforce relationship, because there are other opportunities in Salesforce beyond the one that we're currently working on. And it'll help us bring on people to help us build out the next 4, or enhance credentialing, but also build out the next 3, privileging, contracting, and directory services. So that's what we're doing now. And we also realize that with a 65% market share today of all provider groups, we have current data on, because we know it's current because they wouldn't be getting paid if it wasn't current, on a huge portion of the marketplace. And we know that is going to be valuable to some people. And part of the raise is to bring on some data people who can help us figure out how to monetize that data, how we can combine it with potentially other sources of data to 1 + 1 = 5. So that's where we are now. And the future goal is to do what we did at Intralinks, which was become the de facto standard in this exchange of data. There was no standard in financial services, so there was no regulatory body that decided the standard. We just became it. And that's our goal here, which is that if we can eliminate billions and billions of dollars of dead weight or sand in the gears here and make it more efficient, that's going to be a huge contribution to the health systems of our country. By lowering expenses of doctors, expediting their administrative tasks, by freeing them up to spend more time with patients or learning or whatever they want to do to enhance the healthcare system, us taking away this wasted motion of that used to take 4 months and now taking 4 minutes and giving it back to the doctors, we think is a huge contribution on our part.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to be able to do this, and you're going to become the de facto standard, and we're going to say, we knew them when.
I hope so.
And the mission to increase more focus on the patients and bring a better patient experience. And we often on the show have talked about how within healthcare, it's one of the last industries to bring on technology in the way I'm sure have seen it in fintech and all these other industries. So it's interesting as we're thinking about the future. So what if you were to maybe pull out your crystal ball and kind of dream up where this may be 5-10 years later? What's What do you see?
Well, I think we want to go as fast as possible. And I think we know, because there have been several large technology players who are focused on healthcare, who realize that what we're doing is really important and it's really specialized and it's difficult to replicate. So we see the possibility of our accelerating by potentially becoming acquired by a larger technology firm with a healthcare focus, where we can then benefit from their rails, their additional engineering capacity, their customer support capacity, their training capacity, their install base. Because everyone we've spoken to, some of these large vendors, we've picked a pretty valuable niche where it's hard to follow, because automating these transactions is not simple, right? And it's all the stuff we learned from Intralinks that we could apply here. So in the future, one idea is that potentially our ability to accelerate will be driven by our ability to be embedded into a larger technology firm, and then that'll allow us to become a de facto standard faster. So that's where I see us in 3-5 years, which is we have been noticed by some large technology providers who say, hey, this is something that's hard to do, be probably impossible for us to replicate it in any reasonable period of time. You already have this large install base, so let's see how we can combine our platforms and put a more compelling value proposition on the table for these large health systems.
Excellent. Well, Jim, how can someone learn more and follow along on the journey?
Well, we post a lot on LinkedIn, and we do a fair number of press releases, and also we have a pretty active website where we have white papers and videos. And another thing that this raise will fund is more marketing. To date, we've been able to get away with targeting a handful of very large intermediaries and didn't need lots of marketing. But I think in the future, if we want to create this de facto standard, then making us familiar to health system CFOs and administrators and doctors, when they hear about us and say, why don't we use that? I mean, if I could use one platform to communicate with the insurance company and I could do what used to take me 4 months, now it takes me 4 minutes, why wouldn't I want to do that? So that's how you can learn more.
Great. That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate this and really look forward to our next episode with you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks for listening to How I Transformed This, Success Stories of Transformation in Healthcare, presented by Versus 12. To learn more about how Versus 12 is best situated to transform the healthcare industry and to follow along with this show, be sure to visit versus12.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.